Welcome to another episode of Q&AI. Today we're joined by Nesamoney, a 3-time co-founder, 2-time successful exit. Diaz, welcome to the show. Maybe we start with, hey, 3-time co-founder. How did we get here?
Well, great to meet you, Bob, and thanks for having me at this show. So I am an engineer by training, computer scientist, and I, like many engineers from India, came to America to work at a company called Unisys, which most people probably don't remember. But when I was there, I just sort of saw what was happening in Silicon Valley. At that time, it was Oracle, Microsoft, and others, and said, hey, got the bug to start a company. So I started a company with a couple of my friends, Informatica. We moved from Southern California to the Bay Area to get our VC funding, and then built a data integration platform. I was there well past the IPO, and then got the bug again to start another company, and started a company called SellaQuest, which essentially kind of built on what Informatica was doing. Informatica was about how do we pull enterprise data together into data warehouses and so on and so forth. SellaQuest is about how do we get real-time insights from that data and make it available to enterprises. And then after I sold that company to IBM, eventually through Cognos, and then kind of followed the same theme, data, right? Data integration, data analytics. So what's next about data? To me, it's AI, which uses enterprise data and other data to provide a next level of consumer engagement. So that's what my current company, DaVinci Commerce, does.
Okay, yeah. Now how about for all the next generation entrepreneurs in the audience? Because I think it's always interesting with co-founders. Back in the 90s, you decided to jump off the cliff to start Informatica. What was going through your head, or any words of wisdom when you're starting a new adventure like this?
Yeah, I always tell entrepreneurs, you have to really have a strong passion for an idea or solving a problem. Startups are tough. There's lots of ups and downs. Things don't always go the way you want, but it requires a level of persistence, patience, that you only will have if you're passionate about the idea or the problem you're trying to solve. And I would say to entrepreneurs, don't do something because it sounds cool or there's a lot of excitement around it. Unless you really believe in it, because there are going to be those times when you question your product's not the right fit for the market, or customers you're too early, too late, things like that. The thing that lets you power through all of that is if you truly believe in the idea and are willing to go through those phases to success.
Yeah, no, I always put like startups in one of two buckets. Either it's an emerging technology type of startup or something new, or we're basically trying to disrupt a bunch of mature existing players in the market.
Right.
So in your case, would you have said this, was this an emerging technology venture you were on, or was it more of a disrupting big existing player?
That's a great question. So if I look at my prior two companies, right, Informatica and SellaQuest, they were a better way of doing what was already being done. So the Informatica, they were mainframe and COBOL-based data integration tools, very expensive, very people-intensive. So we went there with an automated piece of software that made that much faster, much less expensive, and so on. But we were replacing something that was already there. My second company also was replacing analytics tools that were very hard to use and learn and expensive. DaVinci Commerce is new because shopping or people looking for products on LLM platforms is very new. In fact, LLM platforms themselves are quite new, right? It's only in the last couple of years they've grown to a point where consumers are using them. So this is more of a new opportunity that we're building for, right? So we're not replacing anything. We're just sort of building on a new way of shopping that didn't exist before.
Yeah. So when I talked to you, this sounded a lot like Agentic AI rethinking e-commerce. But my understanding is DaVinci actually started in 2008. So that was long before Agentic and all this other stuff was around.
It did. And, so our vision back then was, how do we use data to personalize experiences, right? Whether it's through ads or content, because we felt like a one-size-fits-all piece of content doesn't get consumers engaged. So we kind of worked on that. We built a great platform, built a company. The company was growing and so on. Then What we saw, which was to me very exciting, was that the way you make decisions about what content to surface up to consumers and so on was challenging to do back then because you involved a lot of decisioning logic and so on and so forth that you had to program into the system. But with AI, AI did all that for you, right? AI could help generate content. It could help personalize it because it could work with very, very large sets of data. And then we realized AI is so different that we couldn't just add features to our platform and get there. So we just decided to rebuild it completely, right? And so it was still about consumer experience. We kind of now focus more on the purchasing experience, but same concept, but applying AI to it.
Okay, so when you started this adventure, it was all about personal buying experiences,
Right.
you know, but I suspect when ChatGPT came out in 2017, 18, 19, whatever, there was a pivot here.
There was, yeah, yeah. And I remember, you know, in one of our management offsites, I had actually just discovered DALL-E, which was the old name for ChatGPT, and I thought it was kind of interesting, and I played around with it, and I was able to create some entirely new images just by describing them. So I told my management team, this sounds like something very different that we've never seen before. And the same thing happened when we saw the LMs answer questions for consumers, not just generate images and so on, but actually talk to them. So that's when I felt like we can't just retrofit what we had built. And, you know, no one likes sort of discarding what you took years to build. But it was so different that I felt like if we didn't rethink and rebuild and leverage the capabilities that AI brought to us, we wouldn't be getting the full potential of it.
No, I have to say for entrepreneurs, you know, usually when people talk about pivoting, that equals dilution, you know, because now it's like, hey, something product fit and market fit. In this case, it sounds like the product fit was still correct. You're still
Yes.
personalizing the experience, but the underlying technology changed on your bet. How hard was it to convince your investors that, you know, hey, we're going to have to pivot, because that meant you had to stop what you were doing and rethink foundational architecture elements here?
It was not easy. And I think what ended up happening is this market opportunity was sizable and very exciting for us. With our investors, because some of them had invested for quite some time, we just had to bring in a new set of investors to help fund the growth of this new product and so on. So we had to make some changes. It was almost like an extreme pivot where it's almost like a new company coming out of an existing company. And so that was challenging, no question about it. And, you know, but it was the right thing to do. Now, if I look back at when we made that change, it was about 3 years ago. It was the best thing we did. I think a lot of companies and founders sometimes hesitate too much. And, you know, to be fair, investors aren't necessarily excited about making a change.
No, they're not.
And, you know, because they funded what they thought was this, and then now you're telling them it's going to be that. If you're lucky, some investors have the same vision. They're like, yes, we need to change and we'll do it. But it's hard for them financially also to commit even more money.
Some sort of dilution, right?
Right,
Again, you have to rethink it,
exactly.
you know.
Yeah, so we worked it out. We worked out with our existing investors, brought in new investors. And obviously, because the new product and the market were so new, you know, we had to bring the new investors on terms that they would find attractive to them. Is that easy to do? No. We pulled it off. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Okay, well, congratulations. Pivoting in startups is always a tough decision, but it sounds like you pivoted, saw the agentic AI wave coming,
Yes.
and got in front of it. Now, I'm always curious, you know, when I think about agentic AI and startups, feature versus architecture. You know, if I were to start my adventure, Mist again, in networking, you know, would I need a blank sheet of paper? Or do you think agentic AI, well, it's clear you didn't think it was something you could bolt on, right?
Yeah.
You go back to a blank sheet of paper when you started the agentic adventure?
Yeah, we did. I mean, it was truly a blank sheet of paper. It reminds me of some of the changes that, you know, I've seen. You know, first it was going from mainframe architectures to client-server architectures. Then it was going from there to, you know, the web, right? So these are just foundational changes, right? And you can't retrofit. If you look at all the companies that existed in the mainframe era, very few of them made it to the client-server area. Similarly, a few did, and those were the few that just decided and realized they needed to rebuild their products and rethink things. Is it easy to do? No, but the ones that did it survived these foundational architectural changes. And I think we're going through something similar now. There's been a lot written about whether a lot of the SaaS software companies are going to survive or not. I think some of them will for sure, big or small, and those are the ones who said that model is going away, and we have to, as hard as it is, rebuild. And you have to get your investors on board. You know, if you're a public company, it's harder. Even if you're a private company, it doesn't go very smoothly. But and then for new startups, that's where the opportunities come up, because the market's full of companies built to an older architecture. You're the new product, and you don't have all that legacy. You don't need to, deal with your existing customers and so on. So I think startups do very well when there are those kinds of changes happening in the market.
It does seem like, when you do something new, blank sheet of paper is usually easier than having to be stuck with something that's already built. But I think in this agentic stuff, the next thing is, how do you defend it? Are we going to watch the big guys all of a sudden turn it into a feature real quick? In the case of DaVinci, how's it defendable? How is it, OpenAI or someone else doesn't come build a DaVinci as a feature onto their...
Yeah, well, I think every entrepreneur who's building an AI company ought to think about that and be aware of it. There's a couple of things that we've learned, right? One is, don't add a thin layer of functionality on an AI platform. They will get there, and they have way more resources than you probably will as a startup, even if you're well-funded. The second is, I think, and this is where DaVinci Commerce operates, is in the enterprise, right? The enterprise is a little different from pure consumer applications because the margin of error is zero, right? As I like to say, in the enterprise, there's no almost, like you almost got the P&L right or you almost got the pricing model right. You have to be very precise about everything. AI fundamentally is not very precise. It wasn't designed to do that. It's designed to give you a lot of content and answers and so on, but it's not known for its precision, right? So if you could take that and add that next level of precision to it, I think there's always opportunity there, because it's just not what AI was designed to do very well. The other is that AI platforms, the foundation models, primarily work off of open source data, meaning data that's available on the web and so on and so forth. What they don't have access to is data that's sitting deep in the enterprise, right? And so if you build a product that leverages that, and that's what DaVinci Commerce is doing, then you have a proprietary edge over the foundation models. Right?
Okay, because I always describe kind of this new agentic AI as non-linear, non-deterministic. It's kind of a new programming language letting us automate and build solutions. It does seem like the fundamental software quality piece is changing now, right? Because it's not like I can hand you a piece of software over the unit test anymore. Any words of wisdom, back to your point of, enterprise needs to be precise. We're dealing with non-deterministic technology. How do you actually verify that, the solution has some determinism to it?
Yeah, so you have to build in the guardrails to it. So for example, in our business, we make sure that a lot of the content comes from reliable sources within the enterprise. So we often don't just go out there and scrape sites and try to figure out what content to surface up to consumers. A good example is, product reviews, right? So this is in fact happening in our industry right now. If you go and look at a product, you ask ChatGPT for a product, it might show you the product, but the reviews are coming from Reddit. What's the likelihood that is not a real review, just somebody either got angry or maybe even got paid to write a bad review? So that's a problem. So we say, well, reviews have to come from a reliable source and has been verified and so on and so forth. That exists within the enterprise, right? So sourcing of data is one. The other is, this is a funny thing, it's like AI is not accurate, but you can use AI to check on AI, right? So we actually build AI to cross-check and verify the output of AI. So for example, we would get compliance rules from the brand that say you cannot say this or you cannot have this type of content. We feed that into AI and have it check the output of the AI.
That's one of your value propositions, the guardrails.
Guardrails, exactly,
guardrails,
yeah. So agents can check on agents, AI can be used to create compliance checks and so on. So that creates differentiation, right? Because it's very hard for the big foundation models to, even with all the resources they have, to go that precise and that narrow, right? And yet there's plenty of money as big enterprises are retooling for the agentic world, right? It's a foundational change. It's an architectural change. They have to get there, so they're willing to invest in products that get that extra level of security, compliance, and guardrails that allow them to continue running the enterprise without compromising anything.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I think you and I both came out as computer scientists back in our days. You know, when you look at, you had to pivot from this old model to this new agentic model. From the skill point of view, I always kind of wonder if, the next generation of agentic engineers are going to be more language majors than engineers, because it seems like, we're dealing with a lot of natural language, a lot of prompt engineering. Any words of wisdom on, can you teach old dogs new tricks, or do we have to get a whole new set of younger engineers to learn how to master all this agentic programming?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've thought about that a lot. I don't think it's necessarily a world with no engineers, as in people who can understand architectures, code to it, build scalable systems. I think that's still there. But I think the humanities factors a lot into new AI systems, right? Because reasoning, thinking, and understanding business rules and so on is really more not an engineer skill. It's more like an yeah.
It's a whole skill, right?
Yeah.
Tools, I got skills now.
Yeah, different skills. It's interesting. I just, earlier this year, maybe even late last year, my alma mater, which was one of the top engineering schools in India, actually started an AI university. And they're teaching a different set of skills. We were taught hardcore programming and architectures and so on and so forth. And I think there's going to be a new breed of universities or programs within universities that are really focused on teaching the skills needed to build AI systems, which is some engineering, but a lot of humanities, right? And it's a combination of those two that I think are critical.
Yeah, so I make a barrel of wine every year, and I'm starting to see that this agentic programming and winemaking.
Well, there you go, right? And actually, engineers can make good wine too, as I found out when I visited Napa. A lot of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley go there and do that. But I think the humanities are a big factor of it. But the other thing I think also, one of the most important skills that I look for when I'm hiring people is curiosity, right? Everything is changing. And in fact, with AI, things are going to change faster than you ever imagined before. And so the skill is not so much a specific technical skill, it's curiosity, right? If you're willing and able to learn something new quickly, you'll be fine.
That's what I'm saying. I found like it's a little trial and error. I think
Right.
agentic programming is becoming the guys. You have to try and
To
error.
try, and what's true this week may not be true 3 weeks from now, or there may be a new way of doing it, or there's some new protocol, a new way of solving it that's come out, right? So I think having curiosity, urgency, because the big platforms, they are interested in every part of the ecosystem. So they're going to try to, get into every type of application. But if you're constantly reinventing, the invention cycles are much, much faster than they were when I was back in Informatica. There we had 1-year product roadmaps. Now we have a few weeks. The cycle's much, much faster.
I mean, I'm a big fan of, cloud is a better way. You got to have almost weekly product cycles, right? You guys,
Well, absolutely.
deployment cycles.
Yeah, and that's the other change we had to make is, as a company, we had to actually retool our whole internal team to use AI tools, right? Because you can't be an AI company just by making your product an AI product. You also have to operate like an AI company, right? So our engineers had to learn how to use Codex and other, programming tools, right? Or code generation tools. Everything, marketing, sales, it's all basically powered by AI now, because if you want to compete with an AI company, you better be an AI company, not just in product, but in everything you do.
I think that's the words of wisdom to engineers now. You better make sure you're, you look at all these tech layoffs, right? A lot of it has to do, they look at like how many tokens have you burned up. Nowadays, burning more tokens puts you at the top of the list nowadays.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, it's funny because, I was encouraging everybody in the company to say, you have to use AI. In fact, now it's almost mandatory that they have. So I was looking at our AI costs going up of all the tools that we buy, whether it's OpenAI and I actually was happy for once. Usually when costs go up, I'm not happy, But in this case, it showed me that the teams were using AI in everything they were doing. And, I'm sure for big companies, layoffs and stuff may be necessary to make Wall Street happy or whatever. But if you're a young company, the way I'm looking at it is I can make our team 10 times more capable by using AI tools, which means I have 10 times more firepower to compete against the big guys or other upstart companies than I had before. So the last thing I want to be doing is laying people off, because that cuts back your ability to be competitive, right? So it's a different mindset. I think for big companies, maybe they have to, but I always think of AI as a force multiplier, not as something that, we should be using to get rid of people.
Yeah. Now, for all the marketers in the audience right now, back in our days, it was all about search engine optimization, how to make sure your website is the top of, now we seem to be going into this agentic engine optimization, which I think exactly what DaVinci is playing into, right? It's like how we search and find products is changing as they go from a search engine to more of a chat GPT experience. So any words of wisdom on how, for the marketing people, how to optimize their agentic engine optimization going forward?
Yeah, it's a foundational change, so I always use the example of, if you want to buy something and you go to Amazon and you do a search for it, you probably end up with 100 products that all look the same. Maybe the small price differences. It's really hard to tell. Then you have to click on each product and try to learn about them, watch videos about them, read the reviews. It's a lot of work. What consumers have figured out is they can go into ChatGPT and just say, I'm looking for a sneaker that works well in wet weather. That's it, right? And the agents go and basically find that information and surface up products that they can buy. Way more efficient, much faster. And I think that's a foundational change. So the numbers are showing how, I think it was 393% growth in consumer initiated shopping on LLMs compared to a year ago, right? And the sales are converting better too. There's a 42% better conversions happening on AI platforms, or going from AI first into retail environments. And that just shows that consumers are able to find things much faster, don't get impatient while they're clicking their way through these very complicated websites. And that experience is 25 years old, right? And it's changing because consumers have changed their behavior, and they want conversational experience. They want the agents to do the work for them, so they don't have to spend hours buying that one thing they're trying to buy.
Okay, now as we kind of wrap it up here, any words of wisdom for the agentic entrepreneurs in the audience? What words of wisdom would you give them, if they're going to start their agentic startup adventure?
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece of advice is, talk to customers, if possible, every day, right? And I think if you're able to solve the deep problems in the enterprise, most customers by now have been exposed to AI and they know what it cannot do. I think if you're building a company that understands exactly what AI cannot do, and you'll hear that from customers, then I think you can build a successful company. If you're just looking at, I can build something quick and cool on top of an LLM in 6 months, or maybe even sooner, they would have built it. And I think that's the biggest learning I've had in this whole process.
Okay, well, I definitely want to thank you. It's always an honor to have a 3-time co-founder on the show here, and congratulations on DaVinci and the next adventure you're on. And I want to thank everyone here for joining the Q&AI show, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode.